Hello, and welcome back to the ROI Channel, the podcast that's obsessed with the art and science of return on investment, but we throw a bit of flavor in there every now and then. A lot of people have dreamed about living a life of freedom, doing as they please, waking up when they please, not being told what to do all the time. It's a pretty cowboy kind of life. And it's been a year since I caught up with my good buddy Paul, and if anyone knows about this, it's he living a life of cowboyness over in Paraguay, former Aussie, like myself, so you know you can trust him. I'd like to welcome you back to the show, sir. Let's dive straight in. What's been happening since we spoke roughly 12 months ago in terms of people coming and going? Migration is a big issue here in Australia, not necessarily viewed in a positive light. Where you are on the ground, what's happening with the ins and the outs of Asunción in Paraguay?
Yeah, well, I mean, surprise, surprise, the world hasn't gotten any better since last year. It's not like suddenly, the West is amazing and this wokeness is over and the debts are all paid. I mean, you could say stuff like Trump getting elected is going to be better. But basically, the world, or at least the West, slowly falling apart, just like it is still a train wreck. And so what we're seeing here is, this is we're just part of a big wave. The wave is, I'd like to say, the smart money or the people that see the writing on the wall, they're getting out of the West. They're getting out of the broke countries with high taxes, high regulation, low freedom, and they're going to places like Paraguay where, they can find something that suits them better in regards to what they're after. So Asuncion, Paraguay, when I got here 3 years ago, I mean, even I couldn't point to Paraguay on the map somewhere in South America, but it definitely feels like Paraguay's now hit the zeitgeist, or it's hit the mainstream a little bit more. And we're starting to see a lot more people move to Paraguay. And, we're even starting to see some mainstream media outlets talk about Paraguay as well.
And so let's touch on that. Who are these people that are moving? If you had to put them into an avatar, are they young people,
Mm,
old people, men, women? And what's their
yeah.
main reason for moving or exploring the idea of moving to Paraguay and talking to
Mm.
you, who is an expert in making that happen for people?
Yeah, so I mean, we obviously have a crowd that we market to, but it's just in general, it's men, usually single, tech savvy, work online, aged 20 to 40, 20 to 50. What I find is there's really two main reasons people come to Paraguay. The first is taxes. Paraguay doesn't charge taxes on foreign earned income. So if you're a trader, crypto investor, you have some sort of online business, maybe you're a remote worker, you can come here and you can pay very low to no taxes. So that attracts a lot of people. The other people is uh, more conservative or libertarian type people. Because out of all the countries in Latin America, Paraguay's just consistently be right leaning. It's just a right leaning conservative government. And as we leave places like Australia and the West, and we just see, how much of a mess kind of this socialist government and all that. Like, it's kind of nice to come back just a government that leaves you alone, doesn't try to solve all your problems, it doesn't overtax you, just lets you be, lets you make your own mistakes, treats you like an adult. And people really like that, especially when you come from just a place like Australia where you're just so micromanaged by the government in every little aspect of your life. It's nice just to come to a place where you can be treated like an adult. Now, usually those two cross sections of people tend to overlap, but that's definitely the type of expat that's coming to Paraguay. What's amazing and also kind of sucky about Paraguay is that it doesn't have a nice beach, right? And it's not like a party place, yeah? So if you want to like just party and go to the beach and be that sort of guy, go to Thailand, go to Mexico, go to Spain, right? And that's great. It's good to do that. But because Paraguay doesn't have any of that stuff, it doesn't necessarily attract that kind of expat. So it's a very different type of expat that actually decides to come to Paraguay.
Yeah, I like it. It's a little bit more chilled, a little bit more focused on focused on a lifestyle that doesn't revolve around substances and things like that. Um, what has been the biggest shift that you've noticed since you've arrived? You mentioned you've been there for 3 years. What sort of shifts have taken place, if any, within the
Mm.
country itself? Is it becoming harder to obtain residency? And these people that you mentioned, do they end up staying, or they just kind of come in, try it for a bit, and then leave it as an option in the back pocket, so to speak?
Yeah, so the biggest change I would say is that the country's getting wealthier. People are coming here. Like it was far rougher 3 years ago. Still a great place. Now there's more modern buildings. You can see capitals coming here. There's a lot newer construction. So the place is gentrifying in a way. Um, in terms of the people that come here, there's kind of three different types of people. The first people are the real Plan B backup residency type people, and they're usually US citizens because they can't benefit from the taxes. So they'll come here, they'll get their residency, but then they'll go back to their country and they'll just live their life, right? Knowing that, if things take a turn for the worse in their country, they can come here and it's always going to be waiting for them. That's about 30% of people. The next people are probably like the perpetual digital nomads, where they purely just want Paraguay for the tax benefits. And Paraguay has a very interesting residency where you can be a tax residency of Paraguay while traveling. Yeah, so they'll set up their tax residency. On paper, everything's in Paraguay, but they're spending, 5 months in Argentina, 5 months in Brazil, 5 months in Spain. They're going all over the place, right? So they're always moving. And then the rest of people is people like me who live in Paraguay full time. But I would say the majority is that sort of perpetual nomad type person.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, we've seen another type of person come to the fore recently over the last 12 months, and that's the crypto person. Whether it's the
Mm.
Bitcoin maximalist or just the average punter that's caught this wave of price appreciation since the halving in April, I believe. Does Paraguay have a lot of is it attractive for crypto investors? Does it have its own little crypto crowd?
It does have its own little crypto crowd. And I kind of joke about it, right? Because we're in Latin America and there's like some of my mates go to the Bitcoin meetup. Yeah. So there's a Bitcoin meetup, which is great.
Yeah.
But it's like Paraguay is very chill by Latin American standards. There's not much crime, there's not much violence, but I'm not walking around with a sign on my face in Latin America say, "Hey, I'm a big crypto guy, come kidnap me. It's going to be great." So, I really respect those guys. A lot of them have the right intention. They're trying to spread crypto, but I get a little bit antsy about being too public about that anywhere in Latin America. Um, yeah, was that the answer to your question or?
Yeah, it's yeah,
Oh, we were talking
definitely.
about crypto more generally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
More generally, and the
Sorry.
reason I ask
Mm.
is this my latest trip to Argentina this year. I noticed having lunch with a friend of mine in Buenos Aires, and he's using his card, and I noticed a little symbol on the card. I say, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, it's Ethereum backed, so I can use crypto to as a means of transaction." And that really caught
Mm.
my attention. A lot of the detractors talking about crypto saying it doesn't have much of a use case and all this sort of thing. Well, at least in Argentina, the use case was quite strong from what I observed. And I'm wondering if that aspect has hit Paraguay, or given that Paraguay actually economically has been fairly decent, at least stable, it's not such an issue.
So yeah, I mean, coming from places like, at least I remember living in Australia, it was all about, your exchanges and all KYC and everything. In Latin America, it's very much P2P. It's very much meeting some guy, someone you trust, sending them USDT, receiving cash, or vice versa. Yeah, the P2B thing here is huge compared to using exchanges. That's partly because a lot of the big exchanges, don't really accept, or it's difficult for Paraguayans, and also the banks can be quite difficult to deal with as well. So absolutely. Paraguay is kind of unique where in some ways it's very pro crypto. Yeah, there's really, really cheap electricity here because of the hydroelectric power plant. So there's all sorts of crypto mines, sorry. But then at the same time, you can't just like sell sell some Bitcoin for some US dollars on Binance and move it into a Paraguayan bank account. The banks here actually won't accept money from crypto. So it's kind of this weird thing where they're cool, you can use it for everything, but none of the actual banks here will touch it.
Okay, interesting. Here we go. So that gives me an idea. What about crypto mining? You mentioned cheap electricity. Does Paraguay have much of a crypto mining scene?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's several mines in Asuncion, there's several mines on the other side of the country. There's mines all over the place, even to the extent that I actually remember last summer in Paraguay, right? We would there'd be like a blackout every couple weeks, right? For a couple hours. And we're like, what's going on? It turns out there were so many illegal crypto mines. They would literally set up a mine, just plug it into the electric pole, and they were overloading the grid, causing all these blackouts. So the government actually had to have a crackdown on illegal crypto mines here. So there's both. There's underground ones, and then there's big legit mining places as well.
Okay, interesting. Let's run through some of the things that are hot topics in the OECD countries, let's call them, particularly negative issues. One is migration, an influx of immigrants versus what's sustainably absorbable via infrastructure growth. Do you happen to know off the top of your head, I know I'm putting you on the spot, what the net
Mm.
migration or emigration rate for Paraguay is at the moment and how that compares to the infrastructure?
So I obviously help people get their residencies here. And I think they said there's about 25,000 people coming here and getting a residency. So you could assume that's what it is but obviously not everyone's staying here.
Sure.
There's a lot of space in the country still. There's not like traffic or issues like that, but it definitely is busier here. Even though the thing is though, foreigners are maybe, especially, like English speaking foreigners and us, we're less than a percentage of the population. We're so small. There's other Latin immigrants here, like Argentinians, Brazilians, Bolivians, but it's still very small. Paraguay is a huge country relatively. It's only got 7 million people, so there's plenty of space.
Yeah, interesting.
I think
And that leads into the next hot topic here, which has been this way for quite some time. Real estate, residential real estate in particular, and the ability to house people. Here it is a complete
mm,
disaster. I see on X that Labour Party is basically saying the quiet part out loud now that they just want this sustainable growth in house prices, which means throwing people under the bus, essentially, if you
mm.
didn't get in earlier 10, 20, 30 years ago. What's the situation in terms of real estate, the ability to rent slash buy and afford a home in the capital, which I presume is the most expensive real estate in the nation?
Yeah. So there's different types of real estate markets here. So what you're seeing a lot when you come to Asuncion is there's just high rises of apartments going up everywhere. So much so that I think it's almost a bubble. I don't think there's going to be enough demand for all these apartments. Now, a luxury apartment in Asuncion is around 100 grand, which is quite a lot for a developing country. And I think we're going to see those prices crash. That said, when you talk about the actual land in Asuncion, there's obviously a limited amount. Now, it's still relatively cheap, but I think that's going to go down over time. To me, what it feels like is, you think about like a place like Sydney or Melbourne, where, imagine buying like a nice house in a good suburb with a decent amount of space like 50 years ago. Like that house is multi-millions today. I kind of feel like we're then. So my next investment is really to try and get on some property here so I have something to pass on to my kids. But it's definitely where it's also different from places like Australia is there isn't really mortgages here. So most deals are cash, yeah. And I think once you start get mortgages and leverages, that's when really the property valuations can get out of control.
Yeah, indeed. And you mentioned the banking system's a little bit clunky. Uh, with
Mm.
the political regime changing in Argentina over the year, already it's been I follow that market quite closely. That has basically doubled in terms of prices per square meter, and I would argue is still relatively inexpensive. What is the likelihood, in your opinion, of the mortgage market being generated in somewhere like Asuncion?
I feel it's eventually going to happen. Like even the banks here, they're trying to offer people like you can get this little, you get your debit card, and now it's connected with a mini credit card option that gives you like a $200 credit card. So I feel they're trying to almost debt trap a little bit the local population to just get them used to just carrying debt and milking them for interest. But then also, I think they're going to formalize it so that they can give people a credit rating and then therefore be able to give people mortgages easier. But the banks are definitely trying to expand the types of loans and the types of debts that they can offer to people here.
Okay, this sounds like an expanding and digitalizing banking system and economy. It's so interesting to see the difference between Paraguay and neighboring Brazil, where the digitalization is well and truly underway. And it does very much sound like a ground floor opportunity of where you would be, say, here 50 years ago, getting into that mortgage market. And the Commonwealth Bank of Australia did just such a magnificent psyop in terms of their marketing program, which really paid off. But let's talk about average earning power for your Paraguayan. So not the expat, not the guys like that
Mm,
look like you and I, the
yeah,
native born citizen. How much do these guys earn per month or per year? And so, what
yeah.
is their outgoings? What is their ability to rent or buy real estate? Because ultimately, the banks and the people that are writing this commercial and residential paper will have to kind of adjust to the earnings power of those people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the average wage here is about 10 grand a year. Um, I think what's different in Latin cultures and definitely more traditional ones is that people live with their parents until they're married. I mean, I guess it's now the same in Australia. You're not really moving out until you're almost 30 these
Yes.
days. But so I guess it will kind of similar like that. But generally, what would happen is the only when they're married, they'd go out at home. But even then, it's actually a good question in terms of affordability. I think young Paraguayans now are starting to buy cheap apartments at around 30, 40 grand. And how they pay them is they actually pay a few years in advance while it's getting built. So they buy off the plan. Um, but yeah, or they would inherit from their parents. But I'm not sure if I really answered that one.
Yeah,
But what I would
so
say
if you're
is,
looking at, let's say, rental, let's just say a rough median rental figure per month and compare that to your average salary, and then compare that to, you mentioned some figures in terms of an apartment might be 30 or 40 grand US, so maybe three to four
yeah,
times a median average or a median annual salary.
yeah, I would say so. And I would also, I imagine people would live with their parents longer to save before they move out, because you'll get multiple generations living in one house here. That's quite common. Um, to be honest, yeah, I mainly deal with expats. I'm not really out there,
Yeah, that's
drinking
okay.
10 a day on the streets with the people. So yeah, I couldn't say I'm an expert on that, to be honest.
That's a fair call. Well, from your ivory tower, then let's talk the upper class echelon of the real estate market.
Mm,
Cost per living, cost per year in terms of, let's say, if I dropped everything I'm doing right now, engage your services, become a resident of Paraguay, and I live there for a
mm,
year, and
yeah.
I want to live really well. What's that going to
Mm.
set me back per year now? And has it really changed much as opposed to our last conversation a year ago?
It's funny, right? Because there's been inflation here, but then at the same time, the local currency has dropped against the US dollar. So I feel it's almost, if you're earning US dollars, the purchasing power is almost what it was about 3 years ago. So I don't think that's changed much. What I say to people, like if someone calls me, the average Paraguayan makes about 10 grand a year. Now, you as a Westerner, you're not going to want to live off that, yeah? And if you can scrounge together at least 20 grand, you're going to be fairly comfortable here, right? But I would say around 40, 50, you start to be very comfortable here. You know, you can have a really nice apartment, you can eat out almost every night of the week. You can have your cleaner, you can have your personal trainer, you can go out for drinks. You can basically do everything Asuncion has to offer. Yeah, so that's around that income mark, you start to be very comfortable here.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Local industry, which can include whoever's there, digital nomads, they like to have their cafes, right? So, what's the cafe and the restaurant scene like? Do you have healthcare services there? What's that like?
Hmm. Yeah, so the caffeine of choice for Paraguayans is called tereré, which is similar to mate. Mate is in Argentina. It's a warm drink. Here we put ice in it because there you go. It's some that looks like mate right there.
It is indeed.
If you put ice in it, they call it tereré here. And so because most people get their caffeine from that, there's less of a coffee culture like there is in
Okay.
other parts of the world. That said, things are growing. Like the funniest thing here was about 6 months ago, they opened the first Starbucks here, right? And there was literally a line out the door for the first 6 weeks here. And like anyone who's anyone in Paraguay, they had their Starbucks and they were so cool, like an American. So, I mean, even today, like Starbucks is considered like something only the most upper class buy because it's still like $5 or $6 for a coffee here at Starbucks, which is
Jesus Christ.
huge in comparison to the local economy. What I'm finding, which is cool, is as there's more like digital nomads here, I'm seeing more co-working spaces. I'm seeing more, like trendy coffee type places. So I guess that's the signs of gentrification or the market adapting to digital nomads, expats with money, that sort of thing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And healthcare services, are they readily available? Are they,
Yeah.
is there a cost involved? Are insurances
Mm.
available for expats or foreign residents?
Yeah, so there's two levels, right? There's obviously Paraguay actually has free healthcare. Now, and even as a resident, you can go and you can use it. I had a mate who broke his leg. He went and he got a cast, all free, done in Paraguayan healthcare. That said, generally I don't recommend it, right? It's pretty developing world type stuff. There's plenty of private hospitals that you can use, right? So you really have two options. When I first got here, I paid for the top health cover. It was about 70 US dollars a month. And with that, my dental, doctor's appointments, I hurt my arm, I got 20 free physio sessions, everything was covered. And the thing is, what I realized though is as I don't use uh, hospitals much, I recommend to my clients just pay out of pocket. Like here, if you want to see a doctor, you just go to emergency, you wait probably about 45 minutes, you'll go see a GP, they'll treat you, you'll buy your medicine or whatever. You're going to be 50 to $100 out of pocket. I find it's far easier to do that.
Wow.
The other thing as well is you can choose your doctor, you can choose someone that speaks English. Because I was on a big Medicare plan, I was like, I only want to work with an English speaking doctor. Yeah, sí, señor, sí, sí, English, English. I rock up, I'm talking to this doctor. It was very obvious they knew hardly any English within
It
five
was
seconds.
what
So we just ended
English?
up, exactly. So we just ended up speaking in my shitty Spanish anyway. So the only thing I'd say with medicine is it can be the language barrier can be difficult because it's not like you're going to memorize medical terms in Spanish, even if you're learning the language, right? So you're far better just paying a little bit more, getting a doctor that speaks English.
Yeah, good point. Well, if that's the case in terms of those price ranges that you mentioned, I mean that would be a basic gap fee right now in most places in Australia. So really, I
Mm.
mean, it makes an awful lot of sense where you're essentially self-insuring, and there's no need for anything about that. Local diets, strong on the protein. Carbohydrates of choice. When I go out to dinner, what am I going to choose to eat?
So, I mean, it's going to be steak, right? So, just like Argentina, it's very much a steak culture here. I think easily up there with the most kilos of steak eaten per year here. So, that's going to be very popular. Um, in terms of carbohydrates, the main thing they eat here is manioca, or it's called yuca in other places. It's almost like a potato that's kind of a bit more fibrous and sweet. And what's funny, like coming from a place like Australia, unless there's like veggies or salad on a plate, you'd feel like embarrassed. Here, it'll literally just be some manioca and a huge steak, and that's like dinner done. So they seem to care less about veggies and salads here. It's mainly just different types of steak and a few veggies on the side.
Okay, good. Last kind of lifestyle, getting a sense for the what it's like in their question. Electricity grid and the plumbing system and those types of Western comforts. Sydney,
Yeah.
you were told to turn your dishwasher off recently because it was too hot, thanks to some of the energy policies. Well, what's going on with the grid? When the crypto miners are not plugging into the grid, how are things generally?
Generally, it's not a problem. And what's kind of interesting coming from, well, definitely Europeans and Germans are the worst. Like, I have German clients, and they almost have to say, like, that they feel so much guilt about turning on air conditioning or using any sort of electricity. They would rather sweat. Like my girlfriend, she comes from a humble family. Even humble families here, they just leave the aircon on 24 hours a day, all the lights on, they don't care. Right? And part of the reason is because all the energy's renewable, it's all coming from the hydroelectric power, there's an excess. There's not this
Mhm.
guilt around, oh, I have to use as little electricity as possible, or I'm a bad person, like we get in the West. In terms of plumbing and all that, it's fine. Like, I wouldn't say drink the water out of the tap, but it's not going to make you sick. It's not going to give you like diarrhea like Southeast Asia would. So if you have to, you can in a pinch. The thing though that is different here is that in older buildings, they have those small pipes in the bathroom. So, when you're doing your business in the bathroom, there'll be that little bin to put the paper in because they'll use these cheap pipes that can get plugged. On modern buildings, it's not a problem, but if you go to some restaurant that's a little bit more humble, they're going to have something like that.
Yeah, that's a big differentiating factor, and it can vary from place to place in Latin America. Okay, let's talk general mindset on the street, and then we'll move into some crypto. So, the one thing that's a little bit frustrating is feeling like you're on your own here, even though you're surrounded by people. And obviously, I'm a fairly libertarian kind of chap, which is lonely enough as it is. Before Milei's election and the world learned what libertarianism really is, when you talk to the average person on the street here, I don't think they could spell libertarian. What's the
Mm.
average mindset around some of those key values for the average Paraguayan, and why is that resonating with you in particular and those types of people that you help obtain residency? Do you think, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, well, first there's obviously two cultures here. There's Paraguayan culture, and then there's the culture of the expats in Paraguay, and they're similar and different. What I would say is kind of well, what's kind of interesting about Paraguay is that we got to see, or they got to see, I should say, Argentina in the south just be such a basket case for decades and decades. And they're like, whatever they're doing, we want to do the opposite of it, right? Because obviously that
Very
doesn't
well.
work. Even like today, like they're always calling the Argentinians like dirty communists and all that, or the commies in the south. And I know Malay's cleaning things up, but they still have that reputation. And I think it's actually been really interesting for Paraguayans because for so long, when you compare the two, Paraguay was this poor, smaller, not much going on country. And the standard of living, the wages have been increasing in Paraguay. Whereas in Argentina, until recently with Malay, things have been going downhill. So they can obviously see that what they're doing is working. They can see all this expats and all this money come here. And so they're really starting to appreciate that maybe they'll kind of look down on or not that interesting, but actually they do have something that's unique and special here. And I don't see them changing anytime soon. In fact, recently, Paraguay is one of the only countries that still considers Taiwan to be the main China. Yeah, so even when you go in, when someone says they're from Taiwan, it will say Chinese, right? And then mainland China is something different. And China actually came and they tried to court Paraguay saying, listen, we're going to give you all this investment, we're going to give you all this money, we're going to give you all these loans, but you have to get rid of Taiwan. And Paraguay actually expelled those mainland Chinese from the country because they're so anti-communist and they just don't want anything to do that. The other thing is
Base.
Exactly, yeah. So they're very much they're happy to be conservative. They're anti-communist, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon. With the expats, it's very similar. Like the expats that come here, they usually earn enough money to give a shit about taxes. And when you're that kind of person, you're usually a bit more conservative. You understand how economics works. You're a bit more clued in. So the expat community here is definitely more libertarian, conservative, right-leaning as well.
Interesting. And we might use the last few minutes here to touch on crypto in particular, because I know that's an interest of yours. How do you see the crypto space in general? What's the end game here? And what's the difference? Because oil ain't oil, crypto ain't crypto. How do you see the landscape? And then to a degree, how are you positioning based on what your thesis is for the future of crypto?
I mean, my personal opinion is I've always been aware of my own limitations, and I've never really considered myself smart enough to make money as a trader. So for me, it was always just investing and stacking Bitcoin and to a lesser extent Ethereum and just riding that. I mean, so far that's worked out for me. I think what was interesting about this particular bull run in regards to others is that it seems, and maybe because it's early days, but it seems like people are starting to realize, well, maybe, Bitcoin is, well, I'll say it the other way. Maybe there isn't just going to be this next altcoin that's going to usurp Bitcoin. It seemed like it was a lot more tentative in the previous market cycles. There's a lot more hope that these new altcoins are going to pop up and usurp Bitcoin. I feel now there's very much, it's very much a Bitcoin focused rally. And maybe that could be we're just early in the cycle and it's going to go into altcoins later on. I mean, geopolitically, I just see the world getting worse. I see the US dollar eventually getting weaker. I don't believe BRICS is ever going to unify. They're just too different ideologically and economically. I don't see them coming together to form one currency that's going to rival the US dollar. So therefore, I see crypto and Bitcoin having a place in the long-term future. What I'm finding, though, is that it's becoming harder and harder if you're a crypto if you own a lot of crypto, to convert that wealth into real assets. So especially with this latest crypto boom, we have a lot of people contacting me that made a bit of money in crypto. They want to move it. They want to buy a house. They want to buy this. It's just getting harder and harder. I feel like, those two, the traditional financial system and markets is that just the controls are getting more and more. So, yeah, I'm not sure what that means long term. But that's a struggle that I'm having, and I think a lot of people are having right now. I hope maybe there is other probably countries around the world where you can easily buy things without crypto and not show exactly where that crypto came from. But at least Latin America or Paraguay is not like that today.
Okay, that's interesting. So in terms of realizing gains and then converting the currency, or if you wanted to actually use it as a means to buy something.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite easy just to spend, the crypto you've earned. You can get like a little crypto debit card. I'm talking about because crypto wealth is obviously, it fluctuates a lot. As I get older, I want more stability. It's hard to cash out and then move that into traditional assets like housing or, like maybe buying stocks or something like that. I find just with KYC and the banks, it's becoming more and more difficult to do all that sort of stuff.
Okay, interesting. And handing you the floor to finish, what are what are some of the best pieces of advice that you would give to someone who was perhaps where you were 3 or 4 years ago before taking the plunge? What are some things to avoid? What are some things to perhaps get them over that apprehension that comes with potential expatriation? What would you say to that person?
Yeah. Well, what I would say, and this is something that I learned from Nomad Capitalists, right? So this is not original at all. But it was a very similar situation 4 years ago than how things are now, where crypto was sort of pumping and then it had a dip. We can see it started dipping in the last 24 hours. That might happen. Nomad Capitalist made this video and it's like, if you really believe that your crypto is going to pump or your assets are going to rise a lot more from here, well, now's the time to get out because many places like Australia, the United States, Canada, they have basically an exit tax where you have to cash out the accumulated capital gains on your crypto, your investments. You need to pay that to the government before they fully let you go, where you can move to a place like Paraguay where your future gains will be tax-free. So maybe if crypto continues to dip and this 10% or 5% correction becomes a 20 or 30% correction, maybe see that as an opportunity. Maybe that's the time you leave your current tax residency, you cash out your accumulated capital gains at that lower rate. And then once you're in a more favorable tax situation, you can ride the next wave of the cycle completely up tax-free. So that's what I would say. Maybe consider that if you're in that particular circumstance.
Sounds like sound advice. All right, guys, if you're interested in getting in contact with Paul from Plan P Paraguay, details and links will, of course, be in the description. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to catching up with you in another episode of the ROI podcast shortly. Take care, guys.